I want to talk just for a second about one of our programs, Diversity in the PR Classroom. And this is a partnership we do with the PRSA Educators Academy, which is one of their sections. And it talks about the evolving role of diversity in PR education and how people can best incorporate it in classroom discussions and with students. So you can check that out on our website. So I'm very happy to introduce and moderate this panel. Anitra on our team is not feeling well today, so she is not joining us. So please be kind with me as the substitute person. But we have our first in-person Diversity in the PR Classroom session, and it's about how to navigate DEI communications with the depth model. So please welcome Sandra Boone. She is a PhD student and comms practitioner from the University of Oregon. Yay, go Ducks! We expect that same enthusiasm for all the intros. Thank you. Joining her is Kim Clark. She is a DEI comms educator and consultant from Kim Clark Communications. She has a really fantastic book that she's going to talk about today too. And then our final panelist is Shimrit James. She is a co-author of Nature of Work, and she's an independent researcher and writer. And I'm very excited to moderate this panel. Okay. Hold on, Face ID. All right, so why don't we just we'll each do a brief, not me, you all will each do a brief introduction of who you are and sort of what is your role in this topic and why it's important to you. So why don't we start with you, Sandra?
Hello, my name is Sandra Boone, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Oregon, where my research specifically is focusing on equity and power concerns for public relations professionals. And now I'm starting to focus more specifically on questions of language and power. And I came to this work. I worked for 15 years before my program as a communicator in higher education, nonprofit settings. And throughout my time working, I had various times where I knew I wasn't doing anything, quote, unethical, but I had a nagging feeling that something didn't feel right, and that I questioned, in my focus specifically on the needs of my organization, what other human aspects I was thinking, what other aspects I was missing. And so I enrolled in a strategic communication master's, and quickly started to realize that I was wanting to have deeper conversations about our responsibility as communicators, as the people that we are specifically making messages to send them out to the world, what kind of responsibility we needed to feel because of that.
Thanks.
Kim?
Badass. Is it okay if I swear every once in a while?
Please swear.
It's
Swearing is
like
encouraged.
the kind of room I can. That's good because you're going to hear what the title of our book is. So I use she, her pronouns as well. I run a DEI communications firm. So we support DEI strategies because I really believe DEI strategies cannot be successful without the people in this room, without communications. Every CDO you talk to, they'll say around 90% of their job and the effectiveness of their efforts in meeting outcomes and changing the workplace where everyone has an opportunity to thrive depends on storytelling, depends on communications, depends on the language we use. I just got my gift card from San Jose State University after teaching there for 20 years. Universities know how to whoop it up on those big milestones. And I'm also the co-author of the book, The Conscious Communicator, The Fine Art of Not Saying Stupid Shit. And that's really the title with a little asterisk in there. And I co-authored it with Janet M. Stovall. You may have seen her TED Talk in 2018. That inspired me to want to do a project with her, and after the summer of 2020, seeing all the black squares go up, that was the time. That was the moment to come together and put together the depth model, which we will be introducing to everyone today. Shimrit?
Making sure this is on. I'm Shimrit. I'm based in London. I've flown over for this. I'm really excited to be in Washington. Up until last week, I was Director of Knowledge for an organisation called the Digital Workplace Group, and we're a member organisation working with companies such as EY, Adobe, also things like UNHCR, in that role, I conducted research for the organisation, and it was around the digital workplace, but I realised over time I was becoming increasingly passionate and interested in how do you create a digital workplace that's inclusive? What does inclusivity mean when you're working in a hybrid environment? What does and the most recent report I did for them was that relationship between ESG and the digital workplace. How can digital workplace practitioners who are predominantly communicators integrate and amplify ESG efforts for an organisation? And obviously we know that within that S pillar, you then have DEI. That was up until last week. I'm now independent as a researcher and a writer. Kim really kindly invited me to join you all after I interviewed her for one of the papers that I did on inclusive digital workplaces. And I'm particularly interested in the kind of intersection. So the book that I co-authored was Nature of Work. It was how can we create organisations that are more healthy and cyclical. If you think about the organisation like a forest instead of a factory as a living system, that was what that book was all about. So I'm interested in how do you intersect that thinking, which is regenerative, with more liberatory practice, which is then the DEI field, because they often don't talk to each other. So I'm really interested in that intersection between the two of them. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, so I have a list of questions, but I also will just ask some of the questions of my own. So we do want to talk about the DEF model, but Shimri, we're talking about the nature of work. So when we talk about DE&I and the remote workplace, what do you see as some organizations getting it wrong when they do move to that sort of remote work environment? I know we could do this a whole book.
Yeah, I know.
But say like one thing that you notice and what people can easily fix.
You just went straight in with a different question.
I sure did.
Keep us on our toes. So I did look at hybrid working and what can we do that makes it. And I think the biggest thing that we see is thinking they can lift and shift the culture from in-person into remote. And thinking those same ways of working apply when people are distributed. And so that command and control that you often see, that idea that if your bum is on your seat in an office, you're being productive. That translates to a hybrid environment or a remote environment. It never worked in person. It definitely doesn't work remote. And so you start to see things like productivity paranoia, the idea that if you are present, if the little green button on your Teams is there, that means you're being productive. It doesn't. I always joke that I'm being productive if I take a nap in the middle of the day, because I need it to regenerate. But that doesn't look like productivity. So I think that lift and shift is something. We also know that remote work predominantly, not only, but it really benefits people who tend to be from marginalized identities. So if you are disabled, if you are of color, if you are a woman, if you're a caregiver, that flexible environment tends to benefit you even more. Forcing people back in the office, they're the people who are most likely going to be negatively impacted. So I'm not saying it needs to be fully remote or you need to be fully in the organisation, but having that adaptability to understand what people's needs are, and then when should we be coming together as a team physically and being driven by that instead of, I was about to swear. Oh, there we go, I was going to do it. Instead of saying we paid for this office, how do we get people using it as the primary driver? As it needs to be people-led.
Okay, thank you for that and for me not following the question over. We did, last summer, we did a study with Voya Financial on disabilities in the workplace, and consistent with what you said, we did compare differences between hybrid, fully remote, and in-person environments. And people with disabilities and caregivers, all the remote workers, on all aspects of satisfaction in the workplace, the culture, they scored much higher in their perception of their employer than if they were hybrid or if they were. And it was that flexibility piece, that they had flexibility if they wanted to go in person or not. Okay, Kim, here is your wonderful book here, The Fine Art of Not Saying Stupid Shit. I feel like everyone should have received t-shirts with this, but it's fine. So this is fantastic. I love the cover art. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the DEF model?
Sure. Well, it'll tell you a little something about my co-author, because the second half of the title was her idea. The family-friendly version was my idea. So that's just one of the many ways that we complement each other. Also, she did make t-shirts and all kinds of things that said, "Stop saying stupid shit." So we actually have a store with stuff that she has created for people. She's like, "We need swag." And I'm like, okay. So the goal of the depth model, so Janet Stovall thinks in frameworks. She's the Chief Diversity Officer of the Neuro Leadership Institute. And so she comes from an executive communications background. So as we were combining, I have the internal communications experience, she has the external executive speechwriter experience, and now she has CDO experience. So we combined the work that we had been doing with clients for years to help organizations navigate, when do you say something? What do you say? So it ends that, so she thinks in frameworks, she's like, we need a model. And I'm like, you go, because I don't know how to do that. So she came up with, and as soon as she said, okay, here's a variety of models, and as soon as she said depth, I just went, that's it, that's it, that's it. Because it has so, as a storyteller, I look for things that has legs. So when we talk about performative communications, at a surface level of understanding what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, what is needed right now is depth. We need to go deeper. We need to go deeper in the work itself so we can tell that story from a deeper level. So the framework, as you can see, D is for deliberate. It helps answer these questions of should we say something, should we not say something. A lot of organizations go out and say things that in areas and subject matters that they have no business going out and talking about. Now, it's a different story internally. We got to be there for our employees. Consistently, we have to show up for our employees. But when we go into external, we need to be using the depth model to align ourselves. Are we deliberate? Are we deliberate in what we're talking about, why we're talking about? So we're not just reactionary, talking to what Michelle was sharing about the word responsiveness or responsive. I was all about it, amen, because we have to get out of that reaction and get into that response. And that is strategic and intentional. So being deliberate about why you're in DEI, what you're talking about, and who you are. And then E, educated. You have to understand the historical and social context when you're going out and talking about something. So the black squares, one of the many reasons I was very troubled by them is like they'd be 10 words, but there would be years of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars investment in order to make those 10 words true for a lot of organizations. So you have to understand and you have to surround yourself with external and internal people who know the historical and social context from which this crisis situation is occurring. Where did this come from? Where did those demonstrations come from in the summer of 2020? It was not just an instant moment. No, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but no. There's a historical and social context of the why, and most of our messaging from our CEOs completely missed the mark on that. Very, very off tone. Okay, so the P is purpose. So you got to tie anything you do around DEI and anything you say around DEI to the purpose, mission, vision, and values of your organization. Anchor it in the business. Nobody can touch you if you can anchor it in the business. And then T is my favorite, and that's tailored. Like a tailored suit. So we're getting out of the baggy sweatpants, and we're getting into these tailored suits. Like what your organization can uniquely say, like that nobody can come after you, like your thing, the thing that you do that nobody else does better. You do it the best, and it's your unique story. Tailor it to you, and you are answering the question, this is our lane. This is something we can do something about. This is something we can move the needle on. This is something where we can reduce harm, or we can contribute in some way. Or we can add to the knowledge, or we can fund. This is something we can do something about. And then H is habitual. So it's not just waiting for the next crisis, social justice crisis to arise, but you're habitual. This is how you roll. It's folded into the business, and this is how you show up in the world, because a company is nothing but a microcosm of society. So to our earlier speaker's point of people want companies to be in this conversation, and other people say business has no business being in this conversation. Wherever there's people and we're in a microcosm of society, we have to have these conversations. We just really suck at it right now. Don't let that deter us. So the depth model helps us have those mature conversations of what can we do from an external side? And then you can determine, like, how do we show up consistently and meaningfully internally. So that's the framework, and I see that most organizations don't have one, or they have one that is way too complex. And so this is about getting out of the reactive when a social justice or DEI communication situation arrives, or a cultural observance, but it helps you strategically, but it helps you in the crisis situations. I use it to make decisions on when I speak up on something as well. So you can use it as an individual as well.
Kim, are there any companies that you think are getting it right?
I don't say best practices. I don't think they exist yet. I am actually, is Whitney still in the room? No? Anybody else from Southwest here?
Is Brian here? Did he go too? Okay.
Okay. I'm familiar with the social topics framework. Linda Rutherford from Southwest, I've met with her and seen their social topics. They're in the right direction. Since they're not in the room, I will tell you that I think it's a little too complex because it's got lots of things growing off of it. So you can pare it down. But they are absolutely forward thinking and being proactive about what can we do? So we can do something about human trafficking. We can do something about, X, Y, and Z. And so they are more clear of the areas of where they have a responsibility, because if a company has done their due diligence, the company is created to solve a society's problem, right? So this is just an extension of originally why that business started up, because it was started to solve a problem for people, make their lives easier, whatever the purpose of a company is. So we have a responsibility to learn what that is and how to message it, especially externally. So there's classic examples of Ben and Jerry's. And they listen to feedback. When they get pushed on, you're saying this, but you're doing that. They actually make amends and talk about it. So I have way more examples of companies not doing it, right? I don't know if you want to take any time on that, but
We can do a Minty poll later, and then we just stick them all in and put them on front. The former executive director of the George Floyd Foundation, actually now he's a consultant. One of the things he does is he's tracked all the black box sort of statements that companies have made, and then trying to contact them about their promises.
Right.
Even a lot of financial promises that were made actually weren't.
No, not at all. There was
Yeah.
like a third that has actually been spent versus what has been committed. So there are researchers who are following through on these commitments made by companies, and it's quite abysmal.
Interesting. So Sandra, one of the reasons why you do a PhD program is so you can do lots of research. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your research and how it ties to the depth model?
Yeah, so in my research, I'm really working on thinking about what it means to bring equity-informed mindset to the entire work of public relations. So not only is it in terms of the advice and counsel that we're giving our senior leaders, but also bringing it to the hard skills that we do as far as story. How do we do that in a way that's recognizing that there is an actual person involved in that story, and they get to have opinions on how that story should be told? For language, are we being really intentional in our language, and do we understand the significance of it? And then a current project I'm currently working on is specifically around photography, and I'm looking at representations of diversity in stock photography to really think about whether or not they're effective. And I'm finding that while there has been an increase in the amount of racial diversity in particular in the pictures, they're still very much doing a just all smiles, happy look that really has been, that undermines overall diversity work by making it seem like it's already something that's done. So I'm trying to help think about what it means to have a communications professional along with students graduating who really think of equity as being a core part of their entire job.
So to follow up on that, we're just adopting, I'm sure some people in this room too, Microsoft Copilot, and it's really great because you can create images. Are you more hopeful of the potential of AI and image creation, or do you think there's more challenges with that, with DEI?
I'm actually pretty concerned about it. I mean, I'm definitely, no matter what, a slower adopter on things. But it is, I've been thinking about one project in particular, is trying to look at, so how the language cues end up shaping what pictures come out. In particular, one that's been on my mind is the idea of just diverse as a word, which has become code for not white. And it is just in playing around with the different AI models. It is, when I put in diverse, whatever, it is, I'm getting a lot back of crowds of people of color, along with individual people, which for diverse, it's key to realize that a single person cannot be diverse. But it is just with how language has worked, that is what's out there for the machines to pull from.
Okay, great, thank you. And then get your questions ready because I'm about to open up for questions. IPR, we also co-authored a study with the Wakeman Agency looking at the language of diversity. So if you have a chance, check it out because it also aligns with Sandra's research about the power of language and how you can create like language structures, and it immensely affects how you use certain terms. And we also have definitions of like what equity is versus equality, because what we also found in the research is that people did not understand the language of their organization. So if you mentioned diversity, the employees did not understand how it was defined within the organization. So people were not on the same page. So Shimri, you came from London to be here today. So what are you seeing in your space, and then how does that also apply to what the deaf model is?
So in the UK, we think we're not as bad as America, but we're just really subversive. It's kind of under the radar instead. So I'm an Arsenal fan. I found it hard yesterday to watch Arsenal versus Bayern Munich, which I think probably no one here probably cares about. I just saw a little hand go up, thank you. The reason I say that is I met two other Arsenal fans, and one of them was a woman from London, and we were talking about what she was doing in the US, and she came here to study law. And she said, the reason I couldn't do that in the UK is I was the first person from my family to go to university, and I don't have the network of people I need to know in the UK to get ahead in law. And I realized if I come to the US, that social mobility isn't an issue. So I think one of the things that is different is social mobility in class is a huge thing in the UK. When you talk about DEI, I was part of a working group for consulting firms talking about DEI, and that social mobility piece comes up a lot more than I think it does here from what I can tell. So that was one way in which we're different. On the flip side, race and racial issues and ethnic issues tend to get put under the carpet. It's that politeness of we don't want to talk about it, I don't see race, comes up a lot. And I think that ability to talk about these things and the fear of saying the wrong thing gets in the way of them being able to make progress. So I think that's a whole issue where we find it hard to talk about. So the UK government just a couple of days ago released a paper which I need to go through in depth. I haven't done it yet, but it was about how do we approach D&I in the workplace. And one of the recommendations looks like we've been talking about race too much. And obviously we have a legacy of colonialism, which we haven't contended with. That impacts everything. I think we saw an example recently with the government with Diane Abbott, who is one of the politicians in Labour, was the centre of a racist remark from a donor. She tried standing up in Parliament, I think, 40 times and was ignored 40 times. So there's this whole idea within the UK, race isn't an issue for us, but it is, but we're scared to talk about it. So when it comes to DEI and trying to implement change and carry out comms, it's incredibly hard to have those conversations. And obviously gender and other areas are issues too. I'm white passing, but I have Middle Eastern heritage and then Eastern European heritage. Having those conversations to try and tell your story can be really hard and uncomfortable. So I think that's the UK context. My own research, so if I look at the regenerative side, what can we learn from nature? Biodiversity, we know, is essential for ecosystems to flourish. So for me, I'm really interested in how can we take those lessons and bring it into an organisational context. But then from the other side of what I've been doing or have been doing with DWG, looking at things like the inclusive digital workplace and ESG and hybrid, and working with Kim as well, it was very much how can the digital workplace take these ways of working and embed it within the organisation. So if you are looking at creating a digital workplace, if you're looking at the content you're creating, the comms that you're putting out, things like accessibility, things like inclusive imagery. I was looking at things like digital ethics as well. So often they are afterthoughts and you're trying to retrofit them into what you're doing instead of embedding them in that, talking about technology, that first stack. And so the question about imagery, we know that more often than not the developers are white men in particular, and so biases get baked in. So if you're trying to generate imagery that is diverse, there are biases within that code straight off the bat that are going to be problematic. So are you thinking about digital ethics? Are you thinking about accessibility? Are you thinking about your inclusive way of working? And are you embedding that in the first stack of everything that you do? And not just as a one-off, are you embedding that in your day-to-day practice? Are you asking the questions of yourself and other people as well in your team to slow down just enough to then go fast? And I think that's what's beautiful about the depth model. These things can become incredibly emotional when you talk about DEI, and it gives you that framework to have that pause moment. And I think as well what's beautiful about it is we know, I just said how the UK context is different from the US context. So how can you navigate that as a communicator, particularly in a global firm? The model allows you to scale and adapt to the local context. So I think that's also one of the things that are beautiful about it.
Okay, thank you for that. Questions, please. All right, so we'll do quick round robin of questions. May we keep quick questions? Okay, let's do David, and then we'll do Carver in the back. David.
Oh, you need my mic.
Oh, do I?
I don't know. Actually, you don't.
Go for David. Use that professor voice.
Thank you. Outside professor voice. Love this, and I wanted to ask a question of David Brown from Temple University about particularly the find out of not saying stupid shit, because typically what we find is that when stupid has been said, it's reactive.
Yeah.
How do we avoid that is a different, it takes a little bit longer of a runway. So I'd love to hear the panel's thinking about, now if we all know the spotlight is now off. How then do we get more proactive in terms of, and honestly, we're coming from different states where DEI legislation is kind of taking stuff away. Proud to be in Temple, proud to be in Philly, because we're leaning in. But how do you do this with the spotlight already?
Okay.
Kim?
This ties into the last question. I don't know for sure if you're going to ask it or not, because you're going rogue. So
I'm done with questions.
Okay.
Time you.
So okay. Let's back up a little bit. So there's a couple of points I'd like to share. One is the DEI pushback is feedback. It is helping us understand where we miss. It's forcing us to learn what DEI is from not activities, but as outcomes. So in our organizations, what DEI is trying to solve for still remains. DEI has had its own terms over several decades. Now it's been weaponized. It is the next boogeyman after CRT, transgender people, sports, kids, gender affirming care, there's subsets of that. Woke, which was co-opted by the black community and then turned around and used as a pejorative. And now it's DEI. And it's serving a purpose. It's creating a community of belonging, if you really think about it. It's very strategic, very thoughtful. Because it turns into a villain. And when you have a villain, it serves a market of victims. And where there's a villain in a market, a voting market of victims, you gotta have a hero. Right? So it's been, and when people of this market are not in this room, frankly, or are not in these conversations, they don't actually know what DEI is. What they're getting from what they understand of DEI, whether they even know what it means. I mean, they call the Baltimore mayor DEI mayor. What the hell? That doesn't even make sense for those of us who study it. But if you're not a part of this community and the conversations, if you're not invited into these kinds of rooms, so you look at it as you're taking stuff away from me. The change is out of my control. It doesn't include me, right? So the goal here is, let's take this feedback. Let's relook at our strategies. Version of trying to solve those cultural problems to set our organizations up for success for the future of work. Gen Z isn't having it. They're not having these conversations. They expect that we've already evolved. Okay? So us and Gen X, I'm Gen X, you know, in different generations, and in different, not even even regardless of generations, in different pockets of the country and in the world. If you're not a part of the conversation because nobody's invited you into it, they've made you feel shitty because you don't get it, we've created victims. Because now we're the villain and they need a hero. It's inviting, invite. Use language leads to behavior. Invite people into the work. Invite people into the conversation. Any white man who has felt like DEI is not for me, I'm opting out. I see this email about DEI, it's not for me. Please, you are invited. We need you. You got to be a part of this work. It hits everybody. It hurts everybody. We need everybody. Please be a part of the work.
Perfect. Yes, and then I get it.
Really, Kim and I just before this were talking about a model called the two loops model, and this idea of hospicing dying systems, and so that and talk about currents. So there's a deep current which is moving towards this direction. It takes its time. It's more slow, but it is getting there. We know that from Gen Z. I'm a millennial. I know that from the millennial group as well. Those shallower currents that are being whipped up right now, they're passing. They're like that death rattle of the dying system. So how do we respond and treat that dying system with kindness and hospice it gently while also birthing the new thing coming out? So it's a beautiful model to think about the dying system and then the emergence of a new system. And we're right in that liminal space, that crux of kind of the death of modern development. So that's another really useful way of thinking about it.
Thank you so much, Carter. My apologies, we're time, but please find these three at lunch. That would be great. So I wanted to thank our panelists.